Welcome to the Misophonia podcast. This is season 6, episode 29. My name is Adil Ahmad, and I have Misophonia. This week I'm talking to Paige, a holistic integrative healer and founder of the Warrior Sanctuary group, while also holding down a job at a tech startup. We go over a lot of fascinating ground in this hour. Shamanism, meditation, psychedelics and indigenous plant medicine, neuroplasticity, past life healing, root chakra, sound healing, plus her own life story, of course, of adverse childhood relationships, a relatively recent concussion, and the emotional impact that hearing the stories on this podcast has had on her. Let me know what you think. You can reach out, of course, by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or find me on Instagram or Facebook at Misophonia Podcast. And if you could leave a quick review or rating, that's always appreciated. It helps us rise up in the algorithms and reach more listeners. As always, thanks for the ongoing support of our Patreon supporters, which are helping us get more transcripts available for all to read. If you feel like contributing, you can read all about the various levels at patreon.com/Misophonia Podcast. All right, here's my conversation with Paige. Paige, welcome to the podcast. It's exciting to have you here.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. For listeners, Paige reached out and just had a very, interesting approach to everything. So I was like super interested to hear about your story. So I guess you want to tell us kind of where you are now and also leading into what you do?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm currently located in New York City. And I also, Dale, just wanted to give so much gratitude for this tremendous journey that we've all been on together. I feel like for the space you've created and also just the sacred healing that this podcast and everyone's story has really brought to my life. And so,
Oh, yeah.
and I know I've heard some other people say that too. And so I just wanted to just share that sentiment. It's been really an interesting last couple of 8 months. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that too. Just, I guess that's leading into where I am and how I got here.
Absolutely. And however you want to get to those topics, I'd love to hear about that. I appreciate your kind words.
Yeah, and I think living in New York City, especially if kind of having this sensitivity to sound has been really interesting. I've been here for almost 9 years now. And by day, I have a wonderful job in tech that I love. I work for a software company. It's innovative, creative, and I work with really incredible human beings. And I have a team and super supportive leadership. And so I feel like it's really allowed me to do my life's passion. Also, thank you to the pandemic for the remote work style. I think we've definitely all benefited a bit from that in certain aspects. But my passion is really working with integrative healing, or what we call living from the heart work. And it's multidisciplinary approach to shamanism, indigenous wisdom practice, energy, sound healing, kind of past life regressions, ancestral plant medicines, and just so much more. And so my journey with Misophonia has really been about holistic healing. And I do a lot of energy work and meditation and yoga and really looking at anything happening in our lives as more of an intersection between the physical, mental, emotional and spiritual bodies. And so, go for it.
All of that I would love to. I know probably won't have time to hit everything, but it's all fascinating stuff. And
sure.
Definitely, this is a multi-pronged approach to handle misophonia. And I feel like everything you just said, and if we, start with misophonia, it sounds like it'll affect so many other aspects of our lives, and vice versa. Like if you take those approaches for that whole other aspects, it stands to reason that your misophonia can hopefully be more under control. But I'd love to hear everything you do there.
Well, I love that you said that aspect too of the idea of I hear people say there's no cure to this or that, and it is really challenging to be, I think, in this space, but there's lots of different ways that things manifest within the body and outside of the body. And as part of yoga, kind of the idea of any call for attention is intimately connected to something else. So with noise activations, it definitely speaks very loudly and clearly sometimes. But that idea of being how deeply are we listening? And yes, there's definitely a range of emotions that accompany that. But the question is just this, what is that calling to, and how can we journey deeper into that space? And so with my husband and I, like my husband has been such a huge supporter of everything that I do, really, and I think that he's really only become aware of misophonia in the last couple of months. Um, we launched, yeah,
Mm.
and we've been together for like 5 years, and we do like very intimate work with one another, especially like working just in the holistic healing space. And we've also been on our own journeys, et cetera. And we launched a nonprofit in 2020. And that was in the middle of the pandemic, and it was all around kind of like Eastern medicine, African traditions, and really trying to create a new era of recognized healing between science and spirituality. And like, we're not the first or anything like that, right? It's kind of joining this movement that's, I think, really emerged. And yeah, so it's been embracing, I think, that piece of me that has been part of my own healing journey. And it's healing. Like misophonia, I think that that's part of one of the reasons why I wanted to speak about this, is because it's something I haven't spoken about, and it's something I'm still, I think, really very much processing in terms of just like where it all came from, and then where it's all going.
Yeah. Oh, yes. You're hitting upon a lot of my favorite kind of things to think about. Maybe we should. So many different places we can go,
Yeah.
but maybe we should start with like, when did you first realize misophonia had a name? And there was that obviously
Hmm.
I'm sure you knew about it a while ago, but maybe when did you realize it had a name?
So I realized it had a name a couple of years ago, like maybe 2.5 years
Mm.
ago. And it was because we have a cat that I absolutely adore and I love him so
Yeah.
much. But there were like some moments where it just felt like it was extra aggregated or aggravated, I suppose, where it just felt
Mm.
absolutely unbearable. And the it is the emotions. And like for me, how it kind of shows up is in really severe kind of like self-loathing, and self-harm thoughts were new. And so
Ah.
yeah, it
Wow.
and that hadn't happened before. Like I think I've had pretty avoidant behaviors, and how misophonia like came up was, I think most recently was actually last summer. I got so I was aggravated a couple of years ago, if you will, where it was really like at the forefront of just sensation, and it was at the bit
Mm.
like in the middle of the pandemic, where I had, realized that living in New York City, like being with myself and silence was like exactly what I needed. And more
Mm.
of the kind of like introverted nature of myself, but also being, good at socializing, but not necessarily always loving it.
Yep.
Yeah. And so then last summer, I actually got a concussion, and it was in May, and it was playing with my cat, and I just went like boop and bumped my head, and it was right on the temple. And I was like knocked out for a week, like not really functioning, limited
Wow.
memory, recall. Like it was very challenging. And also, I'm deeply concerned for athletes. I don't know how there's contact to contact sports.
I'm so not into that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then I realized like I knew like misophonia was a kind of wiring of the brain potentially, or at least that was some of the research that I read at the time. But it was so activated, like no sleep. I was in extreme distress and agitation. And for the first time, like that's when I was experiencing kind of like those self-harming thoughts. And it was like a
Mm.
plague of hazy hatred. Like it didn't really feel like me. And it was the first time I'd become aware of like a disassociative nature within myself. And it wasn't that I was like in a state of trauma. I was more just like curious about like, well, who is this, right? Like this side of Paige. And so I did a deep
Mm-hmm.
dive into misophonia and like the wiring of the brain. And just so much of the content, I think, made a lot of sense from what I was also studying at the time, which was like neuroplasticity, and Joe Dispenza. And again, I meditate pretty often. Well,
Mm-hmm.
every day I have a daily practice, and I work with psychedelics and things. So just thinking about how to change your mind, I became like almost obsessive with understanding like where it was happening in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
I was like,
Mm-hmm.
which part is lighting up? Like I was trying to imagine like Christmas trees or like anything with lights in my meditations, and like, okay, that sound really bothers me. A siren just went by. Like, where is it in my brain so I could target it? And it kind of became like a game. And then at that same time, I also got an email from Mount Sinai about doing one of their studies on misophonia, and I hit all the criteria. And so then that kind of started the journey, like I think more in depth with like the research and like really trying to
Mm-hmm.
understand this about myself.
So was the cat your first trigger? or it was this concussion period,
That's
kind
a
of
great,
when you really start to
yeah,
notice it?
that's a great question. No, my earliest memories of this is when I was 5. But I think that's the important part of the concussion and doing the study, is because I also found your podcast, and I was actually listening to a lot of the podcast stories, and then I just had a moment of, what they call like memory reconciliation.
Yeah.
And it's probably spent a couple of weeks just kind of like pacing back and forth in my apartment, listening to people's stories, and just having this surge of remembrance of my childhood and like who I was. And I always knew it was like there was some things that were I knew of some of the significant things that had happened, but I didn't really understand like who I was or why I might have responded that way, or why I just didn't remember like being present. And through that kind of activation or trigger of remembrance, like I went into a complete spiral like of my past, and it was a compassionate but very, very challenging, painful remembrance of just how misophonia had shown up for me.
So did you have similar, like, walking on eggshells kind of environment growing up, maybe in times? Like was there some aspect of,
Yeah.
I don't know, fear or
Hmm.
something?
Yeah, that's a that's a great question. And this,
I mean, you don't have to go into depth on them, but
yeah,
it's just if you've heard a lot of episodes,
yeah,
you've heard a very similar kind of refrain.
sure. Well, and I think this is one of the big reasons the deal. I thought it was important to, because it really kicked off, I feel like, a life's purpose work. Because I know
Hmm.
that I'm not, the only one based on this podcast, but I think that there's a tremendous opportunity for us to like kind of do this surge of remembrance together, because so much of Western medicine focuses on like the symptoms and not necessarily the root of where this comes
Yeah.
from, right? And even deeper from, but beyond just maybe this lifetime. And so I wanted to preface like some of the childhood experience that I had with Donna Jackson Nakazawa. And I think that Michael maybe have talked about her. He was in November. I think his podcast aired in November.
Oh, Michael,
Michael.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
so I know he's kind of the school of thought as well, of like thinking about like the adverse childhood experiences. Are you familiar with those,
Yeah.
the ACEs?
I'm become obsessed with yeah this kind of this yeah. So I wanted to let you kind of
Talk
talk
about
about it,
it.
but yeah, I'm very much interested in yeah, adverse the small t trauma
Mm-hmm.
and potentially transgenerational, these kinds of things. I'm
Yes.
just to preface this, I've become really interested in IFS, like internal family
Yes.
systems, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of I mean, the book talks about shamanism, so that's why another reason why I wanted to get you on to hear your take
Oh,
on a lot of this
oh,
stuff.
thank you. Yes, I mean, so this is, it's become so important to me as well, because again, like when I had that realization that I kind of had this dissociative nature to something of within myself, like
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
started to really dive into that experience. And so, yeah, so looking at the ACEs, and for those kind of listening, it basically speaks to toxic stress and family dysfunction, and like the physical and emotional safety compromised, and the situational factors that happen around that. So divorce, addiction, depression. And it's shown a clear scientific link between many types of childhood traumas and adult health disorders. And so one of the things that happened to me in my mid 20s was I also developed a, autoimmune disease, and it was from inflammation and stress. And I actually like healed from that through some of the things that we can talk about in regards to misophonia. I'm getting to misophonia, sorry, the background.
Yeah, yeah, this is great. Yeah, please continue.
And so so the childhood memory. So and also with the ACE, it's a series of 10 questions. And out of that, I think like what Nakazawa points out is that one of the studies said that only 12.5% of 17,000 participants scored higher than a 4. And I score a 7 out of 10. And so
Mm.
it's significant in the sense of just like where do we begin, and like who am I? How did I become the way that I am? And it really makes me wonder too about other populations that were studied, like, for example, Black and brown children, mothers, fathers, immigrants, right? Like things that are distressing in the world. Like imagine going through the earthquakes that are happening right now, right? Or war
Right.
zones.
Oh,
And I think about too, like how much domestic violence is rage from potentially being triggered by sound. Like these are things that I'm thinking about these days, because like for myself, I also identify as a Black woman. We didn't have financial resources growing up, and I don't think that my story is like atypical. Um, and the way that I kind of like the coping mechanism that I developed was being uber productive, as I call it. And I was
Hmm.
totally masking as a good child to like survive and trying to like beat the odds. And I had a lot of like guides and support, and I think teachers and healers along the way. But it was like, so how my misophonia manifested was that like through this journey of remembrance, I realized that I was always very sensitive to sound. I had like supersonic hearing. So at 5, I was annoyed by like the school boxes that had the crayons in them. And like everyone was really excited to go shopping for school supplies. I literally was always thinking about how much noise it made in the classroom because people like to open and close it and do
Yeah.
all of these things. And I would just like run to the library and read. Like I loved being in the library.
Hmm.
And so like apart from that, there was kind of other behaviors that started to show, but they were all things that were rewarded by society. So, for example, I was like a straight A student, I was an athlete. I was president of like a lot of clubs in high school, I was top 1%. I was prom queen, which sometimes is like weird for me to think about because I don't love people that much. And,
Right.
or at least sometimes I feel that way on the inside, you know, like I love people, but like from afar. I got a full ride scholarship to college, and so for the most part, like looking back, you'd be like, oh wow, like you're highly functioning, like you
Yep.
did all of that stuff. But for the most part, it was definitely a place of pain and embarrassment and shame, and I couldn't really figure out why I felt that way. But that's just like I faked normal really, really well.
Embarrassment and shame from if failing or the misophonia
Some of
or
it was misophonia and how I'd feel. Some of it was just things that were happening around me, like in my, you know, in my life too. And so
mhm,
I developed like kind of a manic coping mechanism of just like working really hard and kind of surviving
mhm.
in that way. And I was also just really self-aware and super mature, and I've heard other people say that as well, right? Like you just develop this incredible compassion and empathy for the world around me.
Yeah, a lot of people identify as HSP, like highly sensitive people, and feel like, we feel like we're able to read the room sooner than most people, or sense other people's, I don't know, temperament
Hmm.
more more clearly.
Yes, absolutely. And I really feel too, like being in shamanism and that being a deep practice of mine, is that I was really clued into my intuition and other types of energetic gifts because I loved like the quiet so much. And at the time, I definitely had some odd behaviors. I would say like more avoidant, like a very
Hmm.
difficult time navigating friendships and relationships over a period of time. And I still struggle with communication because like phones and beeps and notifications, like visual typing,
Oh yeah.
talking, like really the mode of communication is pretty stressful. But I don't think I would have said that it was stressful for me a year ago. I think I just felt like something was different. Like why can't I connect with people? And that would be the question that I would always ask myself, is like I feel like I just can't connect, not realizing that I was like avoiding certain behaviors. And like for example, I also don't watch TV that much. I'm not a social media scroller. Like the whole it's a lot of inundation of stuff. And so it makes it difficult to connect with people if they're not in my space, you know?
Right. So I guess it sounds like, yeah, before a year or two ago, you had misophonia. You knew you had misophonia, but didn't think of it being anything that could be labeled.
Hmm.
But now that you look back, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Where it could have been a part of you,
Yeah.
your avoidant behavior. Did you with your family and stuff growing up? Did it manifest? Were you triggered by them? Did they notice your reactions?
Yeah, that's another great question. I was thinking a lot about this, and I hid and masked so much from everyone that I feel that I just now am kind of exploring kind of like the true nature of who I am. And what I expressed was a lot of like everything's gonna be okay, right? Like kind of like Finding Nemo. It's Dora who's swimming, you know, like just keep swimming, just keep swimming. Like that was absolutely me. So even causing like discomfort for anyone else, I never did. And it,
Kind of people pleasing.
yeah, I would say like people pleasing, and also I just I didn't have necessarily a lot of support. Like my parents had divorced very young. I had experienced different forms of kind of like sexual abuse when I was very young, like at 5. Like that's kind of when the safety, I think, was compromised. I had
Mm.
been in households where there were street drugs, and like just my mom was clinically depressed and like get stuck in a universe of like pain and solitude, I would say. And my, my dad was kind of grieving his own losses. I became like bulimic as a teenager and a college student. And so there was so much chaos and stress
Yeah.
that I didn't realize all of the things that were happening around me until recently, really, was when I was like, wow, that was all misophonia and how I would behave in those situations. And it was
Wow.
very like eye opening. As I said, I kind of walked around for a couple of weeks crying, listening to other people's stories. Like
Yeah.
that, walking
Yeah.
on eggshells, realizing that safety is a huge component to misophonia. And then I was asking myself, well, why didn't I feel safe? And so some of it is just, like I said, that remembrance of like what my truth was and how anxiety and depression had manifested, not in ways that people expect, right? Like, Paige looks fine. And really, I wasn't, it was definitely suffering in silence.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously at a young age, like 5 years old, your body doesn't really know when it's hard for it, especially when it's not getting support,
Mm-hmm.
know when you're actually safe or not. And then it just kind of holds on to the same, then, maybe that's how it kind of develops um, it develops some senses like hearing to kind of
Mm-hmm.
look out for danger because nobody else is doing that for you.
Yes, exactly. And I have so much compassion like for my parents, and I have a younger sister as well. And like I think there was just a lot of unawareness. Like that's what Eckhart Tolle talks about, like the pain body and when it's active. And I feel like sometimes in situations like that, like there's this active energetic force that is, hyper vigilant, or maybe it's absent, or it's depressed, or it's
Hmm.
sad, or it's raging. And so it's really difficult, I think, to be present in those moments and really understand, like, this is how it's showing up for me, or this is how I'm showing up for myself, or being able to see that in someone else, inclusive of like my parents and things. And so I think that was also another factor of like I definitely had things at home that activated me, if you will, right, or triggered me. But there was already so much in chaos that there wasn't even
Yeah.
really that much room for me to express it that way. So I just bottled it all in. It was
Yeah. Oh, we know about that.
right, right. And I was pretty weird. Like I was running around doing so many things all the time. And that was just to like keep a constant movement. Like I was always in activity somewhere outside, or, painting, or I was mowing the lawn. And I also, like, through this remembrance, realized I did a lot of things that had a noise component to it.
Hmm.
And so I think I was, even then, like trying to understand or have a different expression of sound.
Yeah. So you're just constantly distracting yourself or just kind of keeping busy potentially to kind of like have a background noise all the time.
Hmm. Yeah, and I read a lot as well, and I had a wild imagination. So even now, this is one of the mechanisms I use, is I start to animate kind of everything around me and turn it into a play, or like, I don't know, a ninja movie. I had an animated tattoo series, like anything that would kind of catapult me out of the situation.
So you would think you would animate it in your head or literally just drop and start
I
drawing.
did draw a lot, but I know I animate it
Okay.
in my head. Like that's still something that I
Yeah.
do now. Yeah.
No, I've I've heard about that as a potential uh, like a therapy or coping method is to try to retake control of the sound around you by doing things like directing a film, like taking the sounds and maybe yeah, like making a play or some kind of a background story, which kind of like um, takes out the well, maybe it reduces the danger and gives you a little bit more control over the situation. That's
Hmm.
interesting that you'd already discovered that.
Yeah, I think I mean, it taps into the creative and helps kind of get out of that fight, flight, or fleet freeze. And
Yeah.
not that I would have been able to say that then, but even now, it's interesting to just kind of laugh at how my brain works and instead be like, wow, what a gift, like this is a superpower that I'm able to transmute this feeling that I'm having into a cartoon, and kind of just make the situation lighter. Because I feel like sometimes it can just feel so isolating and heavy and in your head, right? Like sometimes it's helpful to be like, how can I be in my head a different way if that's what's currently happening? But it takes a lot of awareness and thinking about the bodies in different ways, and also I think being able to see the world in color again and being able to feel vibrant in a way that feels inaccessible sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting.
So,
Yeah. And speaking of kind of being in your head, maybe linking it to um, shamanism work.
mhm,
If you read about IFS, it's talking about parts. The parts inside you. Some of them are in exile. Some of them are trying to protect those exiles.
mhm,
Do you think about parts of yourself as being a component of this, like sub personalities inside you that are um, trying to protect you from something, or because the books on IFS mentioned shamanism, so
mhm,
I'm
mhm.
kind of maybe jumping to shamanism a
Yeah,
little bit,
sounds good.
but I'm curious if that is kind of like uh, have you incorporated that into maybe your misophonia work, and does it what I just said make any sense, like in terms of dealing with inner
Hmm.
separate parts of yourself?
Yeah, I mean, for in the shamanic work, like shamanistic work, it all says that there's this idea of being able to call parts back to ourselves so that we are able to
Hmm.
experience a different level of wholeness, right? Like we kind of go through life kind of like leaving, forgetting, something's being taken from us, if you will, right? And when we start to nurture and nourish kind of those like unloved parts of self, or realizing that there's something here that is missing that feels uniquely like part of our soul, it's a lot of it is inner child work. And I think there's a component to a shamanic work, and I use drumming and flutes, and also like our own voice is very powerful to access like really deep parts of the unconscious. Um, and again, that's through sound or meditation, or sometimes just with intention. Other times with the assistance of psychedelics, I know that's come up as well.
Hmm.
Like the idea is that you can call back, yeah, these lost or separated or hidden parts of ourselves, with the intention of integrating that experience or the wisdom or the love or the gratitude, like really integrating that back into ourselves with a level of understanding that's full of self-compassion and love.
Yeah, I love what you said there. I mean, the self compassion, the gratitude, because as I've read more about some of this stuff, my thinking has definitely shifted to, um, at the beginning of this journey, thinking, oh, it's some kind of like a defect in the brain, or like
Mm-hmm.
a defective wiring. Whereas now, I feel like it's a part of you that actually has good intentions, was trying to protect you a long time ago,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just hasn't doesn't realize that you've grown up,
Mm-hmm.
and is with in good faith trying to protect you, which I think is amazing. I mean, the fact that
Mm-hmm.
it's potentially all it needs is some compassion to show that you love it, this eternal part of you that's scared. I think it's I don't know, it's beautiful,
Yeah.
but it's a whole other paradigm in talking about these issues like misophonia, which where I think we too easily label them as defects, and something that needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. I think, and that form of kind of like memory reconciliation of like, why was I born this way, right? Like, how is this serving me? It's if my life path is cosmic, right, or designed to have us rediscover our gifts, then this superpower is designed for me to understand so that I can live more fully in my bliss. Like that concept, I think feels very like in the sky and almost unobtainable, because when you're thinking about like this being part of my purpose, it's like really to live this way. And I think the idea though is exactly what you said. Like, how can I look at it with like this loving compassion and say like, wow, this has served me so well. And one of my teachers, we talk about in yoga, we talk about dropping the technique. So once you've used a technique, right, to move through maybe like a physical pain or to move through a mental component, right, that you're saying like this technique has served its purpose, therefore I no longer need it. sometimes to work through depression, you might need antidepressants so that you can feel balance, so that you yourself can move back to your wholeness, right? But like there's lots of techniques to get to a
Hmm.
state of being, right? That's the ideal state of being for you in that moment. But then it's time to drop the technique because we don't need it anymore, right? Like we've moved through that stage. And
Right.
so I think with misophonia, sometimes like where I am right now on my healing journey is that part of remembering kind of all of those things that have happened and the way that I responded or reacted to them is so that I can understand the technique of misophonia, if you will, and I can tell myself that I am safe and protected and loved, and I know how to create boundaries. I know how to live within those boundaries. I can be expansive, I can be expansive without necessarily having the self-harming pain, right? Like I don't need that type of alarm anymore, right? Like I'm now
Yeah.
an adult and I can create I have new ways of raising awareness. And I think like that loving inner dialogue that I've had with myself has been transformational.
Yeah, and it's actually relatively new for me too. I mean, it's only been over the past year where I've actually, oh, yeah, wow, this is. I'm starting to remember things that happened, certain patterns that happened during my childhood where I could totally see where a high sensitivity to sound
Mm-hmm.
would have been beneficial. So yeah, I'm at the beginning of that dialogue too, but it's fascinating. Um, so,
Mm-hmm.
and in terms of, actually, yeah, a couple other questions I'm going to throw out there randomly so I don't forget. Meditation practices. So that's another layer that I've been trying to add on for 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a specific practice that you do? Is it, I know you have music going on and sound bowls potentially. I'm curious, like, what does it look like for Paige?
Yeah, for me, I like stillness. So I am
Hmm.
okay kind of being still. Like when I first really started to get into my body, it was through yoga, and that type of movement meditation was incredibly healing for me. And being able to kind of connect it to the science of the body and also with the emotions. And then that was something that was like very clearing. And so, a huge proponent of movement meditation. I have, yeah, I think mostly like a strong Eastern medicine practice. When I talk about kind of like a journey state, I access that through breath work as well. So I almost always
Mm.
combine kind of like somatic breath work with just stillness or whatever I might need in those moments. And then I coach other people and myself also to sometimes do word meditation where it's just writing down like something that's in my physical state, my emotional state, my mental state, and then like a spiritual or some, state that's just out there for me to like feel outside of myself or oneself. And I think those have been really, really helpful. And small bits at a time too. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 seconds. Anything that brings me
Ah,
stillness in the present moment is transformational.
is that so? Did you, if I heard you correctly, you were doing a lot more movement meditation before, and now it's more stillness, just
Mm-hmm.
sitting. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and do you have like a regular time of day, or is doing it during a trigger before or after a trigger to calm down? I'm just curious, related to misophonia, if there's anything particular that you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. I find that the more consistent I am in my daily practices, the more balanced I am. And when I'm
Hmm.
feeling imbalanced in any way, misophonia definitely flares. And again, I'm looking at it as it's calling attention to the fact that I am imbalanced somehow, and my stressors
Yeah.
are there. And so morning time, I definitely it's I like the space of just gratitude. And I know that like people say that and it sounds like, oh, everyone says that. Like gratitude is so different for every person moment to moment. And so I sit with that often. um, Vipassana is another like meditation practice. It's the yoga, like Hindu, or yeah, Buddhism.
Hmm.
And then nighttime, because sometimes it's very bizarre, but I will be jolted awake in the middle of the night due to a sound that is barely a murmur.
Hmm.
And that was also when it drew a lot of attention to me, that I was like, I need to really have practices around this is because how could I be, completely in a deep sleep and then wake up like clammy, my heart racing, etc. I'm like, wow, what was that? And then I hear a sound and I'm like, wow, I can't believe that.
Yeah,
Paige,
yeah.
your hypervigilant state has got to stop.
That is pretty hypervigilant.
Yeah, it's intense. It's very intense. And that moment, actually, I journeyed into that moment, and it was from a past life that I had, as to why that happens. And so I'm
Mm.
also working kind of like integrating that experience into now too. And I do all of this stuff through meditation. So I try to meditate as much as possible.
When you're meditating, are you I don't want to make it sound so black or white, but are you pushing thoughts away or are you inviting thoughts in? Because in
Mm-hmm.
hate to sound like a
Oh,
broken record, but
please.
in things like IFS, I've heard that it's he's like, I love meditation, but I don't like the part where it's about pushing thoughts away that maybe you want to listen to. So I'm just curious kind of how you handle thoughts
Oh,
as
yeah.
you're meditating.
I love on all of my thoughts. I
Mm,
love on them, and then I acknowledge it, and then I sometimes invite visualizations because then I kind of redirect the thoughts, if you will. And so if something is
yeah.
coming to me like, thank you, I'm aware, I understand that's important, and also paying attention to like what's coming, because maybe that really is the most important thing, right? If that's what you're intentioning. But I think setting an
Hmm.
intention before and then being aware of what thoughts come in, because in theory, kind of like the thought that you put out there is going to be the energy that you call back in. And so if your intention is clarity and you are getting bombarded with a few things that need some clarity, maybe just sit with them, and contemplate them and that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
then another way that I work through that as well is inviting my own visualization. So sometimes it can be hard to just like create something right now. And so I have, a sacred space that I invite in that's landscape, nature. It's something that I've been creating in my mind for, 8 years now. And so it's beautiful, it's serene, it has, things that I keep near and dear to my heart. And again, it's in my vision state, my dream state, but it's a safe place that I go to experience clarity, to experience peace. And all of that is from within.
Right. And then where? And then is the shamanic processes, are they around the same time, or is it I don't know, more? Do you need other people to do it? Just curious how that um, blends in.
Oh, yeah, that's actually a great question. So, shamanic practices are, I think, just a way of looking at like in a form of animism, as like nature is, we learn from nature, and we're a part of nature, and every being has an energy, and every being has like some lesson or reminder or message for us to continue like living in our heart space, and to continue to honor, the space that we all share. And that's basically shamanic work, and the piece of doing memory reconciliation. And so a lot of times when we say like shamanic work, at least like our practice is going back to the idea of oneness with the body and with nature, and also being able to acknowledge that there are other planes of existence, like mental, emotional, and spiritual. And the part of that is just all of your work, and what we can do is like the idea of meditating and connecting to those spaces within you, and listening more deeply to yourself, and like asking the questions, and being able to visualize and create uh, these kind of like these alternate realities that help us live more firmly in this reality, actually.
Yeah. Okay. Um, yeah. I mean, are they? Um, do they feel like they are created alternate realities, or are you tapping into other dimensions of yourself?
Yeah, we're getting into it. I know it's just like this is
That
a
could
long.
probably get into a whole other.
Yeah,
The,
it's that exactly what you said. I think there's like we learn from nature, we are nature, and there's no separation because we're
yeah,
multidimensional beings, right? And like just that's the philosophy is that there can be alternate realities that we're creating and that are already in existence. Have you seen the movie like Everything is Everywhere All the Time?
I don't think so.
It's a
No,
movie
it's.
people are talking about. It's a multidimensional movie, just
Oh, is that the
interdimensional.
one?
Yeah.
Oh, is this the one right now? That's up for a bunch of awards and whatnot.
Probably. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's one of
Okay.
the
Okay.
few movies I've seen in the last couple of years. And I was like, wow, yes, this.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No, that is on my list of things to see. Yeah, I haven't seen that
A
one yet.
great
But
dinner conversation. Call a friend,
yeah,
phone a
yeah, yeah.
friend. Yeah, yeah, it's good.
So, do you feel like that has kind of affected how your basically your relationship with misophonia as well in some way?
Absolutely, because I think like through shamanic work, like that's how I was able to also access kind of like the, not kind of how to access the deep parts of the unconscious self is knowing that there are these pieces of little Paige, you know, like
Yeah.
the girl that I went to and sat with, and this is they say this in IFS as well. There's a lot of overlap there actually, of
Right.
like you as the adult, right? Like kind of go to the inner child, and you are really remind them that they're loved, remind them that like you are safe, and all of these things, and you do that in the shamanic realm as well. And when you're asking if someone's there, uh, so in our practices too, and like what we do is it can be helpful to have someone walk that journey with you, as they say. So let's say in a drumming session, you are sitting in meditation, we would do some breath work, become present, and then you can facilitate using sound, like drumming, for example. Like there's something about the repetitive kind of like beats per minute. There's kind of different beats for different levels of access that you then drop into the subconscious, very similar to like hypnosis, or there's a lot of different ways to get to the subconscious. But yeah, but then that person is kind of like holding, right, the beat of the drum, and also the rhythm of this interdimensional experience with you, and you walk that together. And sometimes just being knowing that there is a person in support walking with you to a different plane for you to understand and integrate an experience that has been separated from you, right? Like there's been a cause for separation, some break that happened, whether that be, you know, being made fun of or something else, anything that causes a stress tremor. The idea is that we are going to retrieve that to understand our wholeness. And you can do that, you know, with yourself. And I highly recommend like working with people though. Like I think that's part of the community journey as well. Is that is coming out of that isolation that misophonia sometimes creates.
Hmm. Yeah, that connection with others definitely adds a whole other dimension and ability to yeah, access parts maybe. Um, yeah, interesting. Um, you want to talk about what's the music like? I'm obviously a big music fan, so I'm just curious,
Yeah.
like, what makes it good? You mentioned flute, drums. Is there anything? Um, is it? Are there good sources that someone can listen to get a sense of it?
Mhm.
Can you just kind of find a YouTube playlist and just get a little bit of a sense of it
Yeah.
without actually being around other
I love
people?
that question. Yes. So yes, flutes and drums, and like there, and I'm sorry I didn't respond to your email when you said this. But yeah, I'm also a big music
No, it's
person.
fine. I was actually hoping we'd wait for this conversation, so that's fine.
Yeah, and I think like it's interesting because sometimes shamanic drumming, if you're unfamiliar with what the practice is, right, like context can sometimes help a lot with being able to absorb material or kind of like remember, like, oh, this is what this is. But because of the type of beats per minute, especially for someone with misophonia, the first minute might be excruciating because you're like, this is really like that, whatever is coming up for you, like that might happen. And then when
Yeah.
you release into, oh yeah, I'm on my healing journey because I'm experiencing this intense emotion, means that's exactly where I need to zero in on. That's the place. And so I think that takes work, right? Because that is the work, is being able to move through these challenging emotional experiences that we have in order to get to the bridge of healing or create the bridge of healing within ourselves. So there's shamanic drumming playlists. There's a lot of different types of drumming. And so I would just kind of experiment with like where you can dive in, right? Like there's,
Are there ones that you would recommend? Like,
oh,
is there like maybe a name or a
oh
subgenre
yeah.
that you're
Well,
particularly
Can we
interested in?
put it in the notes? A subgenre?
Oh yeah, of
Yeah.
course. Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, and then I think Native American flutes to me are I think really beautiful and special.
Mm-hmm.
And binaural beats have been incredibly helpful for me from a sleep perspective. And especially
Mm-hmm.
over the course of time, I noticed that, if I do that for a week, meaning go to sleep with binaural beats, and then allow my brain to kind of like rest and adapt to that new feeling of expansiveness and safety, I rely on them less and less. And so I try never to
Mm-hmm.
do anything for extended periods of time. I like do the technique or work on something that someone shared with me. I allow there to be space for me to contemplate, right, and to understand like what that meant for me and what it brought up, and then I either continue or I move on. And so I allow a lot of space. Oh, and I wanted to also bring up the repetitive nature of also listening to things. I think you had said this happens with you too, whereas like I can listen to something that's pleasing to me, right? Like some sound or some song like 100 times in a row,
Yeah. Yep.
easily.
Yep. I think it's part of the HSP, like the highly sensitive breath. I feel like, I know I've, before I knew what Misophonia was, I'd sit at jobs, listen to music, and then find like myself like minutes, maybe hours later, just still affected by, I don't know, some song, and I might have an album on repeat.
Yes.
And I'm like, I didn't get much work done, but I really felt something. And yeah, I don't know. Now I'm like, oh man, did I like, I don't know, lose out on career opportunities because I was just so into music and just listening to songs all day. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I think it's really, I don't know. I agree with you though. I kind of dive into that being meditative for me as well, because there is this
yeah,
like trance state that happens, especially since like a sound that's pleasing like that, releases the serotonin that I need to be like, oh yeah, sound. I do have like pleasure with sound, or experience pleasure with sound. And then when the other things happen, it kind of it helps to balance it out a little bit. So
and I know that back in the day, I would try to escape triggers by just playing back music in my head, or if I
mm-hmm.
didn't have headphones, and so I wonder if that's somehow related.
I mean, yeah, I would be really curious about that too, because I haven't, because I mean, with sound healing too, since that's something we work with a lot with singing bowls. Like the first time actually I went to a sound bath, it was in New York City, it's a place called Bloom Center, and it was going to be 4 hours long, and I was a little bit nervous because I looked at all the instruments and I was like, okay, but I love instruments. Like I was really talking myself into like everything that happens here is going to be a blissful experience. Like sometimes I really have to prop myself up for going into those types of things. And it was so magnificent because I found myself just really, now when I listen to music, I really try to explore the breadth of sound and being really curious about how I can, add new layers to it, or can I look at it and observe it and 360 it and kind of like think about how the sounds come together and what's that doing in the brain, and really studying sound from a healing perspective, since it does penetrate the cellular level, and especially with the different resonance and hertz and all of the things. And so when I get into that state though, it's nice because I feel like my nerd brain, as I call it, like I'm really able to
Hmm.
just super focus in on, I think this sound is absolutely healing this other part of me that feels a little bit disconnected. And so I start to create these storylines around song lines. And for me, that's also been something that's like super helpful. That's just, something that I do for myself, but it creates these really beautiful narratives. And I feel like I'm rewriting the story of me as I kind of go through this misophonic journey of healing.
Yeah, right. Rewriting your story. That's also have heard of that as being kind of um, a way to heal, and all comes back to kind of trying to rewire your brain.
Yes.
I mean, when you intentionally try to rewrite your story, it does do that.
Yeah.
It can rewire your brain, and that's what I feel like the key to a lot of this is just doing that, and neuroplasticity is part of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, super. So the sound healing sessions, are they kind of like sessions where you're going into it as for for doing sound healing in particular? I'm just curious how long these sessions are. Like, are you listening to the same kind of rhythm for a long time?
Yeah, I work with practitioners, and there's a lot of people that are really stepping into this gift of music and kind of offering this, and anywheres from 20 minutes to an hour, to I've been to some sound sessions that were 4 hours, and a lot of the
Hmm.
ones that I gravitate towards are more along like chakra balancing, so kind of working on
Hmm.
like the root connection, and the root, I think, for anyone experiencing the root, meaning is that like kind of like the base of your spine, uh, yogic nature, like kind of like, yeah, so the root chakra, it has everything to do with like safety and protection. And so once those lines were starting to be drawn on, wow, the like, misophonia might have a lot to, or expresses more fiercely when I don't feel safe. And I started to work with sounds that were more targeted towards that area of my body. And that in and of itself has been transformational. Like I felt like I just like the trunk of a tree and my roots extended into the core of the earth. Like I've had really beautiful visualizations of being able to create stability through sound. Specifically things like singing bowls, and there's things that you can look up to, like this is for the root
Hmm.
chakra. And those type of sound sessions have been incredible.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, definitely want to look into that. We mentioned, obviously we mentioned psychedelics in the past, and you've heard Michael's episode, experimenting with ketamine, and now I've seen on his Facebook group that he's starting to grow his own mushrooms. So I'm curious, kind of like
Nice.
how how yeah, how does that integrate, and do you feel like that is what do you feel like the role for that is? Is it
Mm-hmm.
part of facilitating rewiring the brain? Is it also kind of helping to aid with I don't know, meditation or
Mm-hmm.
uh, other aspects of misophonia, I guess.
Yeah, that wonderful question. So, I am very familiar with psychedelics and different types of psychedelics. I don't have experience with ketamine, but I, before even kind of like identifying strongly with misophonia, I'd worked with ayahuasca and
Hmm.
a couple of other like plant medicines. I think it's the most known one in South America. We travel back and forth to Ecuador a lot, and we work with indigenous tribes that hold medicine space there. And also with psilocybin, and I think that's it. I haven't done too much, but for me, how it showed up in misophonia is that, I mean, years ago, it helped really, really undeniably helped me heal the lupus, like the anticoagulant blood clotting disease that I had.
Oh yeah,
It,
you mentioned that, I think. Yeah.
yeah, it undeniably, like that was a manifestation of all of the pent up stress that I had kept in my body for years and years and years, that then when I turned 25, all of a sudden I was just ill, like just ill,
Hmm.
wasn't able to get out of bed, was sleeping, was mutating. Basically, I felt like an X-Men. Like my body was just like really, really calling for attention. And through plant medicine, different things were exposed, like some of the things that I had mentioned from the childhood, like ACEs. I remembered those, like those were black holes. Once I remembered them and I started to really do the work of healing those, that disease went away. Similarly, um, since I really started to connect with the misophonic, um, I think, expressions that I was having and activations I was having last year, through working with psilocybin and also a couple of different cactus medicines. Remember, I said I was like obsessed with trying to figure out what part of my brain was lighting up?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
I
yeah.
saw it. I saw it in a journey. And it was like the world had absolutely stood completely still. And and it's important to preface, preparation is very, very important with psychedelics, and making sure that like the set and setting and the intention and everything like that is for healing, because a lot of
Hmm.
things can be um, just just opened, right? And I think all of it can be absolutely beautiful, but the preparing of like what this means for me and why I'm doing is huge, especially with psilocybin. And so that one of the journeys that I took was that, like, I would love to understand more intimately like what this means for me and how it shows up, and what is the path of healing. I know it may not just go away, right? Like I do believe in spontaneous healings, but I didn't think that this was one of them. Like I really do believe this is a superpower. So can I create more harmony and balance with this expression in my body. And so during the journey, there's music, etc. And then all of a sudden, time just like stopped, and I had this feeling of complete peace, and I experienced this my the most profound clarity that I've ever had. And what I was able to see, I can see like kind of inside of me, was exactly where those connections, those neurons kind of fire when I'm feeling some type of way. And it
Hmm.
was so incredibly powerful and beautiful because it also there was color to it. There was, you know, peace and serenity. I was able to I think like identify the fact that like, yes, this you came into this world with this gift so that you can also speak about what this is, right? It's connecting back to ourselves in a more meaningful way. And a whole lot of other messages came through. And that for me was kind of exactly what I had been looking for, was like, how do I calm this thing down? And what came to me was just like, no, you need to fire it up. But like you are able to do that because of like the awareness and just the journey that you've been on. Like this is part of your life's purpose, you know, like it's this is it. And I felt like that type of peace that I was able to receive from those moments of understanding and clarity was what I needed in order for me to continue to move through this in a way that is uniquely me, you know, part of my blueprint of being embodied in this world.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds, yeah, very enlightening. Um, have you actually? I guess since you're doing a lot of these with other people, have you met anyone else who has misophonia on these journeys?
I have not explicitly, and I'm wondering if
Mm.
it was something that we both were hiding a bit, right? Like that's how that a lot of times they talk about
Yeah,
energy.
happens a lot.
Yeah, like we
Yeah.
both were kind of, oh, okay, like this is something we work through. And so I think now that's actually part of my that was part of the messaging. And when you were asking, like, does it help with meditation? I think absolutely plant medicine can help with meditation because it helps with living more mindfully and intentionally, if that's what you're doing it for and not recreation. Is because there's a way to prepare for these things, right? Like taking care of like your body and sleeping, and there's certain diets that you partake in before you take certain medicines. And so all of those mindfulness practices absolutely start to transform your life, because you're closer, more connected to, I think, like how we were meant to live, right? Which was not in separation, but more closely aligned with everyone and everything around us. And I think working with people, part of my purpose, sorry to answer your question, was that if I speak about this, right, it's kind of how you called in this podcast, and now all of a sudden there's so many people that want to share their story and hear their
Right.
voice, and it's so powerful. I think being in work that I know can heal, because I myself have had this experience of, I used to feel absolutely crippled by what would happen inside of me, and like who knows what self-harming thoughts, like where those things lead, right? Like there's just such a feeling of desperation that
Hmm.
being able to, I think, know my story and uncover different ways that I can be in support and in service to you know, humanity in this way is what I would like to do and what I'm doing. And so I think that the more people will come. I'm a safe
Yeah.
space,
Yeah.
you know, I've declared that I am a safe space for this to be a part of like our connection.
Yeah. So we're getting about an hour into
Okay.
this. So I'm, but you know, that's a couple more things. Like, well, I guess maybe where. So since you made these realizations over the past
Mm-hmm.
year or two, especially, and listening to the podcast, I guess where would you say maybe your misophonia is now, and kind of what do you plan to do going forward? Like, do you plan to settle into some regular practices, or are there some other um, therapies that you want to pursue?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I ask myself this question. So, in where my misophonia is now, I would consider myself to be integrated. Like I know
Hmm.
that there will be more things that will come up, you know, in terms of, do I sometimes feel like anxious, or do I feel nervous? But I feel that I have the tools to be able to move through them. So not living in fear, not letting that be the reason that I do or don't do things, or am not around people, or do not connect with people. And I think that's a huge step in the healing path. I have a lot of tools and techniques for my inner levers, right, to be more in balance too, like breathing, and my emotions are much more stable. And what was the second part? What am I going to do with this?
Well, yeah, I guess maybe over the next year or two, like,
Yeah, techniques. Yeah.
yeah.
I want to continue diving really deep into what I'm currently doing, continuing on the journey work, and because I felt disassociated, right? Like here I was kind of like in this healing path and working with people, and like, oh, this is great, and I'm like living this life of bliss, and Paige's life is awesome. It's just like, but there's these other things, and so I'm really excited about kind of like stepping more fully into a vibrancy of living, and living with a quality of living that I want to live in. And before, I think I was like maybe living a life I wanted to live, but the quality really wasn't. It was hard, right? It was painful. Like I was living in a lot of pain. And so who am I? The journey now is like, who am I without misophonia, if you will, right? Like who am I without my triggers? Who am I when I drop that identity and don't live with that? Who could I possibly be? And I think that's the question that I'm really stepping into this year, is exploring that person and being able to potentially, partner and connect with other people who are starting their journey, entering that journey at the end, through that journey, and on to the next one. And so that would be the idea behind it, is being able to connect with community and continue to learn more tools and techniques. And everything is infinite, and really I think capitalizing on the fact that like we are infinite, and like what's the potential in that. And yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up.
No, that sounds great. Maybe, yeah, let's leave it on that note, and I'd love to obviously stay in touch with what you're doing, and maybe have you back on in about 6 months or a year or something, and just kind of see where this is taking you. But yeah, really interesting
No,
conversation.
thank you, Adil.
and
Yeah.
and yeah, I wish you the best, and obviously we'll have links to a lot of this stuff in the show notes. So
Okay.
yeah,
I'm happy to send over links in the show notes. And again, I just want to thank you. I haven't talked this much in a long time, so thank you.
that's why I kind of sense that, especially when you said you're not like super. Well, you're still very introverted. I wanted to cut her off before you felt like you were exhausting
No,
yourself
thank you.
or anything.
No,
So
thank you for the space. Thank you for,
yeah,
for just how you have really, I think, stepped into such an important role. And I'm so grateful for you. So, and for the podcast, and for everyone else who's shared their story.
thank you, Paige. So many fascinating aspects of this conversation. I do hope people absorb all of it, and I'm really happy you, Paige, have achieved some control over your misophonia. The things you talk about in this conversation, I think, can benefit people actually far beyond misophonia. If you like this episode, don't forget to leave a quick review, or just hit the 5 stars wherever you listen to this podcast. You can hit me up by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com, or go to the website misophoniapodcast.com. It's even easier just to send a message on Instagram at Misophonia Podcast, or on Facebook or Twitter at Misophonia Show. Support the show by visiting the Patreon at patreon.com/Misophonia Podcast. The music, as always, is by Moby. And until next week, wishing you peace and quiet.